you who are following along in the little workbook, there are, and if you'd like a photocopy, by the way, just let somebody know, and I can get some made photocopy here of the questions and stuff during the video and stuff. So, but the questions, if you're following along, are going to be starting on page 20. Well, really 29. A couple of in-home kind of home study questions, and then 30 and 31. This week is going to be focusing on promises and covenant, and why that's a big deal. Why that's a big deal for marriage, and really for relationships in general. One of the things that's going to get brought up is something that's been very, very meaningful to me in terms of clarifying some things. When you talk marriage, why is the covenant important? Why are the promises important? Somebody might say, maybe you've heard this before, that it's just a piece of paper. Well, the thing about the promises, the thing about the marriage document, the thing about rings going on the finger, I tell couples this, even couples that have been dating or together for a long time, it changes when these show up. It does. There's a dynamic shift. Even if you've been together for a long time, there's a dynamic shift. Because now all of a sudden, it's not so easy to walk away. When you're dating, particularly early on in the dating relationship, the ability to walk at any point, right, is there. You can just break up, right? And that makes it for a particular dynamic within a relationship that Pastor Keller is going to describe as consumer vendor. He's like, even if you like your grocer, your butcher, even if he's a really nice guy, there's only so much that's going to keep you there, especially if you find better meat for a better price in another place. When it's a consumer vendor relationship, there's not a reason to be as loyal. There's not a promise that I'm going to be with you through thick and thin, even if your meat is worse and more expensive. We're going to go to the place where we can get the best deal. Another thing about consumer vendor is that everybody is always, at least to a degree, putting their quote-unquote best foot forward, putting on a little bit of a show. Again, one of the things that happens, and maybe you've experienced this, those of you who are married, is, and it's totally normal, at some point after you get married, one or both of you relaxes a little bit, and all of a sudden the other person starts seeing something, what? You never did that before. Well, you never saw that before because they filter that out while you were still dating because they wanted, best foot forward, right? Your now husband may now have moments where he doesn't smell great because now, well, yeah, of course, I just came back from the gym and I haven't gotten around to showering yet. But when you were dating, especially early on, he wouldn't have dared show up stinking from the gym. Right? Now that changes. Well, so you can think of probably examples like that, right? When it's covenant relationship, in its best, it creates a nest of safety to allow you to actually just relax and actually be who you are and have the other person still love you. However, you got to be ready for that too. You got to be aware that there is a case study in a pre-marriage class that I don't use anymore, but I did like the case study part of it a lot. And it was about a couple that dated, and it was kind of whirlwindy and long distancey, but they were so in love, and they always did everything. She loved going fishing with him, and he went with her to the ballet and to opera, and they were always talking, and they got married, and a year later they both found out that she really didn't like fishing. And he really didn't care about opera and ballet. But when it's consumer vendor, you're always putting your best face on and acting a little bit because you want the other person person to stick around. Now, we're not saying here that when you get married you don't try. That's part of what's going to be brought up here when it comes to making promises, and then when they get to actually the section on mutual submission, which is you're gonna, in marriage, you will try to do things. A really cool example of that I think of is with my in-laws actually, my mother-in-law and father-in-law. My mother-in-law, in all seriousness, most of the time, probably doesn't really care a whole lot about cars and engines and things like that. But she would go with my father-in-law to car shows and spend time with him. And when he had this little orange coupe that he built that he would enter into things, and she would cheer him on, even though she could really care less about whether it was chrome or steel or anything else. It just, whatever. But she went. And it was a way of showing love and care and compassion within their relationship. And there are other examples you can think of like that probably, right? So you will try, but also be aware that it's going to make for some interesting conversations, especially as you maybe transition from a dating relationship to a marriage. You're going to find out you don't actually like doing that? Really? Okay, so with that, we'll get into this, and then we'll do some reaction. Does anybody want any copies of the questions for this section? If you do, let me know. I can make copies. Anybody? Okay, Kristen, I'll get you some. Okay, so I'll make a few copies, and if anybody wants them, they'll be on the back shelf there.
What we want to talk about is what makes marriage marriage. In other words, what's at the heart of it? What's its essence, particularly from a biblical perspective, which is traditionally what's been the perspective in our culture as a whole. And let me throw out this question to you as we begin. So I want to ask about your lists, both before you got married and how they might have changed or what you would recommend them to be afterwards. In other words, what was the kind of person you were looking for prior to getting married? But now that you've been in it for a while, how has your list changed? How would you advise others and sort of the qualities that they ought to be looking for in the person that they are married? In light of the fact that this promise is at the heart of it.
You know, I don't know about you. We've actually never talked about this. This should be fascinating.
All right, you go first.
We met each other when we were really young. You know, we were in college, and I didn't have a list. It's just like, he's cute, we hang out, this is cool. And the relationship evolved over years, and suddenly we were getting married. Like, we chose each other for sure, and we dated, we broke up, we got back together. That was like our...
With me.
It worked out. It worked out. That was our choosing point, right? Like, we're gonna do it. But, you know, it's interesting because I have not actively thought of the question of what would my list look like now, but I wonder if somebody had posed that question to Kristen in college, what I would have said. I know it would be different. You know, I think about Joe's developing ability to serve me, what that actually looks like to be patient with me in my complete otherness, my complete weirdness in the ways that I'm not like him. And I think, oh man, you know, I didn't know that even needed to be on a list, and that's huge.
It seems like such an impossible question of how to grow together over the course of a lifetime. It's like the growth question to me, and maybe this is better answered by Tim. I think you've probably seen a lot more of this than we have, but how do two people do things like reach for opportunities and make a home and try and change career, like lose a job and get a different job and change careers and have children. And, you know, I'm such a different person as a mother than I was as a single person and that I was as a wife without children.
I think we've been really effective in making those changes, and part of me wonders whether it's luck.
Right, like so far, I think it's one of the biggest questions that I have about how marriage works still at this point and
Yeah.
how we're gonna move forward.
And there's that, I think, that background fear or question of, is this thing that may look like it's about me growing my career, is it really serving our family or our marriage or not, and how do I know?
Okay, I'll say there's three things I think you need to have on your list of things that would help you grow throughout the marriage. But none of these three are quick and easy, even to explain. One, I would say, is a common worldview, and by a worldview, I mean you basically understand reality the same way. And I'm talking about things like, what are human beings for? I know this is going to sound philosophical. What are human beings for? How do you decide right and wrong? You know, when we die, what happens? I mean, I know you say that's religion. Well, yeah, that's a little even bigger than religion. It's more like, it's what John Rawls calls comprehensive views. I mean, people have different words for them. It means your common understanding of what human beings are for and what human life is about. And so it is kind of a matter of religion. And there has to be at least, I'm not saying you both have to belong to this, you know, you can't be a Baptist and you can't be a Presbyterian to be married. What I am saying is you have to basically have a same view of what life is about, the same faith, or lack thereof. There needs to be some kind of compatibility there. Secondly, you have to learn how to solve problems, which means not always find that one person's always giving in to the other, or that you're just staying away and just saying we're not going to go there.
To learn to fight.
You really have to learn to not just fight well, but to fight through, and you actually have some solutions. Now, thirdly, what C.S. Lewis calls a common mythos. And a mythos is this. You go to an art gallery, or you go to an art museum, and you spend like an hour in front of a particular painting. In fact, you get back there every couple of months because you just can't get enough of it. And you actually notice that there's somebody else or a couple other people who tend to show up every couple of months to look at it too. They'll probably be good friends. In other words, when there's certain pieces of music, certain narratives, certain novels, certain artworks, certain things that they give you a sense of meaning in life, and you find somebody else who does too, you've got the basis for a friendship. It's more than just, we both like to play tennis. I would actually say, even though common interest like that is great, it's more like if you read the same books and they both make you cry. And then that's what I mean by mythos. So I would say those three things, that gives you what you need to move forward. Not actually money, not actually temperament, introvert, extrovert, all that stuff is probably not nearly as important as those three things.
Tim, we're at least occasionally using the language of covenant. It's the language that Christians use about the vows that are made. What's the difference between a covenant promise and a contract?
A covenant is actually a combination of law and love. It's a contract all by itself is a fairly sets up a kind of consumer relationship. So if I have a contract and you are to give me a certain quality of lettuce and I'll pay you so much per head, we have a contract until you don't give me, you might say the quality of lettuce that you said you were going to give me, now I can break the contract. You've broken the contract, so the contract's void. In a covenant, it's a combination of law and love, which means on the one hand, it is public and binding. That's the law side. But it's also love. What you're really saying is, I'm going to be there for you even when you're not everything that you say you're going to be. So it means I'm committed to the person and I'm committed to the relationship, not just to myself. Whereas in a contract, it's frankly selfish. In other words, I'm committed to the contract as long as I'm getting out of it what I want. If as soon as I'm not, then the contract's void. The covenant is a binding combination of law and love, so in some ways it's more intimate than just a personal relationship because of the binding commitment.
So essentially what you're saying is it's not so much fidelity to the legal word, but it's fidelity to a person.
Let me ask you this, and maybe we can start over here, because I'm not Christian, and on the one hand I feel like I feel like Tara and I would answer the three topics that you touched on very, very similarly, and I can see how that's reflected in our marriage. But what do you feel, and what do you two feel makes Christian vows unique or perhaps essential, as opposed to, like, we were married in a Unitarian church, and I feel very passionately about the vows that we took, and we did write them ourselves. But I would love to hear, actually from all of you, what you feel like makes the Christian vows unique.
Well, I'll start, but I won't go as far as I'd like to hear what everybody else is saying too. One time I was talking with a Jewish man and a Christian woman who came and said, "Would you marry us?" And I basically said, well, I said, look, I love you both. I wish you both the best. If you get married, I'll be as friendly and supportive as possible, but I'd rather not do the wedding. And I explained the reason why. I basically said, if your faith is at the very center of your life, which I hope it would be, then that would be part of your center you can't show the other person. And so you're either going to have to kick the faith out to the periphery, or suffer the feeling like this person I'm married to doesn't understand this very important thing, which is kind of very isolating and awful. What's funny is they said, that's funny, our rabbi said the same thing. The rabbi said, I love you, I'd be supportive of you, but I still won't do the wedding. And he said exactly the same thing. So at one level, I would say the reason I advise this is not because Christianity is unique, even though I do think it is. I think we ought to move on and answer that question. I think even if it, at one level, just making sure that the most important faith commitments that you have are shared by the other person, it's actually just common sense. So that you really feel like you can be intimate. Otherwise, you either have to push it out to the periphery, or you can't be intimate in one area where you really need to be intimate. So that's one level.
You know, I would say that the promises that are made in different faith traditions, and no faith tradition at all, as long as they're promises and not proclamations, are not all that different from each other. I think what potentially is different is that from a Christian perspective, we on the one hand believe that human beings are uniquely able to make promises because we're made in the image of God, and we're built to do it. We're created to make promises, but not only are we created to make them, which sort of enriches that promise to some degree, and you say, oh, this is what I'm built to do, but we also believe in the promise-making God. Others want to comment on that, reflect on that?
I consider God to be an active participant in our marriage. And so that seemed a little theoretical when we got married. It felt really good. It seemed really like the right thing to do. Like, this is great. God sanctions our marriage. What God has brought together, let no one tear apart.
Talk about a three-stranded cord,
Yes,
like the two of us and God, bound together. You know, that sounds like what a great picture. And,
Yes.
you know.
But now, as we've walked through that, as we've lived this out, one of the things that defines our marriage in a way that I was not anticipating, and I don't know that I ever could have, is that Joe will come to me and he'll speak God's promises to me. So there's something outside of the context of our marriage that we both understand that is bigger than us and that we believe is really important. And he'll come to me and he won't just tell me that he loves me, he'll tell me that God loves me. And he'll remind me of the promises that have been made that are actually bigger than our marriage and that are being worked out through our marriage.
Sam, I would just add, what makes the Christian commitment unique is Christian identity is different than any other kind. All other religions and modern secularism, every other culture I know, your identity and your self-worth is basically achieved. You have to perform. You either have to live up to religious standards or your own standards or whatever, and you achieve it. And so that means that your self-worth goes up and down depending on how well you think you're doing. And you need other people's to bolster it by saying you're great. Christian identity is received. You're completely accepted by God, by grace, because of Jesus. And that gives you a deep combination of both humility, because you got it as a gift, but at the same time unbelievable strength, because you're completely affirmed by God. The only person whose opinion in the universe counts, accepts and loves you. Now, to the degree that sinks in, the fact is that most Christians don't live into that identity, but just a little part. And it takes time to live into it. But if two Christians are married and are living into that identity together, it gives you a kind of security that enables you to be extraordinarily open about your own flaws. And it enables you to give criticism and take the wrath of the other person, because their wrath temporarily doesn't destroy you the way it does if that person's love is a big part of your self-identity and your self-worth. So it gives you the ability to criticize each other and take criticism from each other in a way I don't think any other kind of identity does. So there are some things about Christianity that are unique that give a marriage a particular kind of strength.
Sam and Terry, you asked a question. Reaction to that, is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said sounds beautiful to my ear.
We have differing opinions of like what role God and religion should play in our marriage and our lives, and now that we have a son, certainly how we want to raise him and what belief system we want to introduce him to and raise him in. And we had a colicky baby. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that particular challenge.
Really?
Yeah. And when we have had a two-pronged marriage, when both of those threads were coming completely unraveled, there was no third thread to stabilize us, and that was a really challenging time for us. And I think it inspired a lot of the conversation that brought us here to this point today. And Jody talked about having the same place to take comfort in during crisis times, and for us that was a real crisis time because we were going through so much personal growth and our marriage was going through so much change. We had this new baby who is a complete lunatic to take care of, depending on us, and we were underslept and all the challenges that are,
I may have had my
really
doubts
typical.
about God, but during that time I did wonder if he was punishing us.
All the challenges, the traditional standard challenges of new parenthood, plus the screaming, and I think that's been something that we have struggled with. We can take solace in different places, which then feels divisive.
And I'll be candid in saying that I think for our worldview, to the extent that we share one, and I think we really do, when your marriage is based on the two of you and God, a stool is always stable. 3 points are always going to be steady. And I think for us, when we look to a lot of different things in addition to ourselves, I can't tell you how many restaurants where that four-legged table is just a little rickety. And I feel like we have supports all over the place, which is, in friends and family and shared beliefs and all these things. And sometimes that's really robust. And sometimes that does wobble. I have to acknowledge
the times
that.
when it is robust, it has been very supportive for our marriage in crisis times. And I think one of the things that we as a couple that is not overtly Christian needs to be conscious of is that when there's a crisis time, we can't turn to two different posts. When there's only 3 posts and the two of you need to turn to a different post, there's only one post to turn to.
I get the sense that you know where to go when things get tough.
And we have to make sure consistently and together that we are not turning to 2 different places to take solace and reshore.
I was just going to say, the traditional wedding ceremony in the Christian church, you actually make 2 vows. Before you make vows to each other, you first make a vow to God. It becomes the foundation for which you make your promise to one another. You say, hey, before God, I am going to give myself to this person. Only then you turn and make promises to one another. And I think even that promise to God, however, is made with this recognition that God's made a promise to us. And that's why we take this crazy risk of making these vows to each other, of making this insane promise to be there through thick and thin with another person. It's because we know God is through there with us, through thick and thin, and has ultimately demonstrated that by giving himself radically in Jesus.
The key concept in this session is the covenant. We live in a culture in which almost all our relationships are what I could call consumer relationships. In a consumer relationship, you're in a relationship with another person or an organization, as long as it benefits you, as long as you feel like I'm getting benefit and the price is right. And as soon as you feel like the other person is not giving you the value for what you're putting into it, you're out of there.
At the very heart is God promising, I will be your God, you will be my people, and I will give myself to you, and you will give yourself to me. Not that we understood that really very clearly from the vantage point of the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, when Jesus shows up, then his self-donation on the cross for our salvation is really where the whole concept of covenant makes perfect sense now, that God is giving himself to the final uttermost in order to keep us as his people.
Yes.
The covenant is so binding that he will go to death and even beyond for it.
And the reason why we are called to and enabled to make promises to our spouse and to say, I'm going to be there even if you're not everything what I would like you to be, even if it's not benefiting you. Well, I was actually going to say, when it says in Romans 5, Jesus died for us while we were yet enemies. And as my wife will quickly attest, and I will too, there are times in which marriage feels a lot like that you are sacrificing yourself for the other person who doesn't seem to be on your side at all. And yet, because Jesus did that for us, we can do that for each other.
But marriage is not all just, sacrificially donating yourself and having a very, difficult, martyred kind of attitude towards it. There's mutual fulfillment through mutual sacrifice, and it's different. It's different for men, it's different for women. We both get to play the Jesus role, but we are, in our different gendered ways, sacrificing and finding fulfillment. And actually, that's really the topic for the whole next session. So I hope you come back, and when we do, we'll talk more about that. See you then.
Per usual, reaction, question, comments. Joy.
I think it's just a lot to process as they were talking. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's the three of us. Or, just like, and thinking in Eric and I, marriage in our life, just how we've both turned, I like that analogy of both turning to that one pool. There's three legs or poles turning to that, and how he has done that. And just a great reminder of that. And then just an opportunity for self-reflection.
Yeah, so let's take that one that you brought up there, Joy, because like you said, there's a ton we could unpack from this. But let's take that one, the turn. What's the danger of not turning to the same post?
It's unstable.
Okay, one is instability.
Right. I mean, if you're turning in the same direction, when people got married, Kim's dad used to, he would actually make him a three-legged stool, and one for being God and one for being husband.
Okay.
And that was a good example of how
Sure.
the three are stable on different ground.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Sure. So there's the stability there. What's another danger of turning to different posts besides just general instability?
I think people get different perspectives, and then that can create a gap between
Okay.
like a discrepancy, or depending on what it is, if you're seeking out people who will support you, then it's going to create a bigger gap of who's right or who's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or even in a crisis of just getting two different opinions, and then that can create more conflict or a bigger gap. So it's not, isn't really, it may not solve or guide you to a common.
You may have well-meaning friends who want to be your friend and support you, and in the process, because they're supporting you, they want to support you, and that means in our culture you throw the other person under the bus. Well, is that strengthening the relationship? Yeah, it actually creates more distance. What's another one? I mean, we still haven't hit on one of the biggest dangers that I can think of. Okay, so let's take what you just said there and just be really specific. You guys, if you're not turning to the same post, a real danger is that you could turn to another post that is really, really supportive, but isn't your spouse, and it can set you up for, at the very least, an emotional affair, because you're going to that other person who's being supportive instead of building the relationship with your spouse. Particularly, yes. I mean, obviously, we live in a 21st century culture, but particularly the opposite gender. That a well-meaning friend, or maybe sometimes maybe a not so well-meaning friend, who is stepping in to be the knight in shining armor to support you in your time of trouble and your grief, and it can cause problems if you're not careful. So, I mean, yeah, Joy.
Well, just another thing too is I think it's if you're not going or leaning on Christ to help you when you are going outward, and then even if that's doable, if it's manageable, if it's working, then rather than strengthening your faith in Christ, then it's like, well, we got this, you know, and so there's less focus on Christ, and over time, then that can just snowball into moving more away from Christ, or not going to church, or leaning more towards the social guidance.
False sense of security that sets you up for a bigger fall down the road when the wind really does pick up. Okay, so yeah, with that three-legged stool, lots of good things to unpack there. Anything else? There were other things obviously brought up. Any other thoughts or questions? Dave?
The depth of intimacy that when you both have the same faith, there's such a deeper connection there.
Mm-hmm.
I know that even times when I've been gone working on the road for long periods of time, when I've been working on the road, we've sometimes just like pick a chapter of the Bible to read each night beforehand before we talk, and then instead of just talking about like, well, how the kids are doing and what's the weather like or whatever, we would specifically talk about that verse, and there's a closeness that comes from discussing the word and being in the word together that doesn't come if you're not yoked that way.
Did it make sense what he said about if you don't share the same faith commitments, that you end up in a situation where there's a deep part of yourself you just can't share? And I think that's an important thing to at least think through, right? I mean, we're talking about something, I mean, you could make a joke just to illustrate a point, I suppose, to a degree, but if you had one person in the family who cared deeply about their favorite football team, and you had another person in the family that could care less about football, well, of course there would be something you couldn't share, right? The other person is like, this is so cool, and the other person is like, oh, let me know when the game's done. So it's something that you can't share, right? You could come up with all kinds of examples, right? But when it comes to something really deeply emotionally, spiritually, relationally personal, like faith commitments, if you're unable to share it, that's, I think he uses a good word, isolating. It's isolating because it puts you in a position where this thing that is so core to you is just, they're off doing their thing, you're doing your thing, and maybe you try to reconnect in other ways, but it just makes for a relationship that is naturally less connected, less intimate. So I think that's really, I thought it was really interesting when he said how he talked to the one couple, and then he found out that the rabbi had said the same thing. Judy.
It can almost be conflictual too, because the two individuals could each have their own quote playbook or set of rules, and those could be in conflict with each other. So they both have their own basis for the relationship or what they turn to it, and it's totally different from the other person.
So think of the snowball effect here. This isn't just an isolating thing just on a single level, like, okay, you're going to church and the other person isn't. But there's a snowballing effect, worldview, which then leads to priorities, which then leads to life choices. And if you're both starting at a different deep faith commitment, it's going to give you different worldview, which is going to give you different priorities, which is going to give you different life choices in terms of the things, how you handle things, parenting kids, what is important, what are we going to spend time on, what are we going to spend money on, what are we going to get involved in. There's a snowball effect here.
That's really kind of setting yourself up for disaster.
It can. Some couples figure out a way to kind of come up with almost this détente, but it still makes for a very, and usually what will happen, and it's just a general observation, usually what will happen, as I've seen it, is that over time, if the couple stays together, because a lot of times this will break the couple apart, but over time, if the couple stays together, one will naturally start just drifting toward the other, and that can be good or bad. On the positive side, what I've seen happen, just one example of a positive example of that, what I saw happen once is at my first church down in Sanborn, southwestern Minnesota. There was and at least in this regard, they had a unified commitment in terms of the core Christian faith. Shar grew up a member of Zion, baptized there, went to grade school there. Her father and her uncle were both heavily involved in multiple things in terms of church council and construction anyway. And she marries John, who himself is baptized, grew up Catholic over in the next town. And so they kind of had to figure it out. And they had a core thing, but there was still a division. She went to Zion, and the deal was the kids went with her to Zion. John could stay at the Catholic Church at St. Anne's in Wanda. But over time, over a period of decades, what ended up happening is that when I first got to Sanborn, John would occasionally come with Char to church. By the time I left Sanborn, John was coming virtually every Sunday with Char to church. Hadn't joined, but he was coming. He was slowly but surely this is what happens a lot of times. The couples that stay together and want to have peace and love between them, one will naturally over time drift in the direction of the other for the sake of liking each other in peace. And in John's case, it was a happy example because John was, what I would say John in his youth was more of a nominal, occasionally go. He didn't take it very seriously. What his relationship with Char, what it forced him to do is get deeper, and that was good. It got him deeper into the Word. It got him deeper into the faith, and so, and that, by the way, is another thing. If you have one personality in the relationship that is more stubborn and persistent in that area, again, over time, if they stay together, there's going to be a pull, a natural relational gravitational pull. Okay, good stuff. Other things, anything else? So the stool, having the common faith commitments. Joy.
There's one thing one of the guys said. I don't remember the whole context, but something about he used the word luck, like as if luck that was working out. It's as I was listening to the video, I'm thinking about Eric and I, even those three core things. I mean, I think at the core, those three things we do have, but it's not luck we got together. I truly feel like it's all me and God's plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just another thing too, where it's like, well, if it's luck, it worked out, and that's great, but
most couples get together. I'm going to make two observations here. One is most couples get together because there is a common connectivity. That's normal. Very rarely will you have a couple get together, much less get married, and then in most cases it doesn't last very long, if they are completely like there is something about a measure of compatibility, right? If you're completely driving each other crazy all the time, you're not going to naturally get together as a couple. You're just normally not. So there is that. Now, the other thing I'm going to say is over time, I'm a child of my times. My culture says right now that the predominant voice in my culture right now is that of the soulmate, right? The one special person made for you. The opposite idea, what you brought up with the word luck, I suppose, could summarize it, right? I think actually both are ditches we want to stay out of to a degree. It's not luck, because God's in control, right? God is guiding his universe. God is guiding things. But I think there is a caution perhaps to say about the one in a million soulmate that if you miss them, you're doomed, which is kind of the impression we get from romantic, apocalyptic Western culture, which is you got to find that one perfect person, and if you don't find that one perfect person, it's never going to be perfect. I think somebody like Keller, and I think I would be too, there's probably a number of people out there in the world that if they were to be put in your path, if God would put them in your path, could end up being a happy spouse for you. There's probably more than one person out there. There might be lots of people out there. Now, where that changes in the Christian view is that once you find one of those people, okay, that's your person now. That's your person now. And now it doesn't matter if there's another 6 or 7 out there that could work. Don't go looking for the better deal. You've made the commitment now to this person. And unless the Lord takes them from you in this life early or something like that, this is now your person. And that's where the covenant part of it kicks in. So I think there's a couple of ditches we want to stay out of. I think, yes, God does guide. I totally agree there. But I'm going to kind of counter to romantic American culture by saying that there's more than one person out there probably that could work for you. It's just this is the one that God dropped in your lap.
And I think with that too, because then it's like even if when we started dating or got married, if those 3 core things maybe weren't completely solid, it was like, well, God put this person in my life and in Eric's life.
Mm-hmm.
Trust in that. And over time, I think it's been solidified. It's not easy to bail if I know that it's part of God's plan.
Mm-hmm.
And trusting that.
Well, and the covenant commitments that have been made now, right? There's a bit of an anchor there, and that's good. Because like you said, then it's not so easy to bail. Because that's another thing about, if you have a totally consumer view of marriage, which is you stay in as long as you're getting something, if you have a totally consumer view of marriage, there's not a whole lot of gravity to keep you from bailing, really. So I think the commitment there, part of it, of the covenant, of the vow, is important, really important, and you sense that. Any other thoughts? Again, I'm seeing gears turning, which is good, but any other thoughts? So one of the first questions for this particular session, so those of you who have it, there's going to be a question about, okay, some takeaways and things like that. But then the first discussion question's on page 31. And this will get you started for next time. Just asking you, did you hear anything in the video that was particularly helpful? And did you hear anything that you disagreed with? We've talked about a lot of the things that apparently you all, and I would agree, are helpful, but was there anything in the video that you kind of went, huh? if you can't put your finger on something or whatever, just go back and rewatch the video. It's up on YouTube, and maybe think about that if there was something that we can talk about. One of the things that's mentioned in here, number 2, and again, just to think about this, is they give you the 3 things: a common worldview, an ability to solve problems, and a shared mythos. Okay, so we've kind of talked about A and C. I think B is really, 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 really important. Not the ability, and I think what was pointed out in the video was particularly helpful. It's not just being able to fight without killing each other and still liking each other at the end. It's the ability to actually, okay, this is an issue in front of us. How are we going to fix it? Or make it better? Or build it stronger? That's a really, and I think that's a skill set that keeps a lot of individuals in their own life, and then a lot of relationships stunted. So whether it's just you individually, or whether it's you and your spouse, I think most human beings are really, really, really good at diagnosing, if given information, okay, this is an issue. We can, if nothing else, at least privately, we can look at something and go, yeah. Where the rubber really hits the road, though, and I think maybe even coming up with a plan, right? That's why we have all these different things out there on commercials and books and in videos and whatever else, self-help sections of whatever, right? There is no lack of plans to get through problems and make life better, right? I think the real issue, the ability to solve problems, and it's the verb there, solve. Not just simply recognize there's an issue, not just simply agree that there is something that needs to be worked on, not even going so far as to just agree that there's a plan. I think the big issue that we have as individuals and as couples so often is the ability, the desire, the willingness to say, all right, here's an issue, here's a way to fix it, all right, I'm going to do it. The I'm going to do it part, right? The verb. I can see the issue. Now I'm going to actually do something. And the problem that couples have. So individually we have this issue. But the problem that so many times couples have is that one or both can see an issue, but we don't give ourselves permission. We don't give ourselves permission as couples to actually be an accountability partner for the other person. And unless the other person in the relationship is willing to actually let you hold them accountable, unless you're willing to let them hold you accountable, nobody is going to actually get anywhere in the long run in most things, simply because you either have 2 choices. Either you fight about it. If you're not willing to be accountability lovingly toward one another, you have 2 choices. Either you fight about it and it gets worse and worse and worse, or you ignore it. Those are your 2 choices. And neither one solves the problem. Neither one actually solves the problem. So I think B there is a really, really important one. You gotta be in a place in your relationship in the long run, I think, to be able to listen to your wife or to your husband and actually go, you're right. Can you give me a hand in this? And being able to do that, that's going to set you up in a much better place to actually solve the issue. Because now, instead of having somebody you're trying to avoid talking to about it, now you got an ally. Now, instead of somebody who's just simply going to yell at you, now you have somebody who can be your help, in the true sense of the word, your helpmeet. Somebody who can pick you up. All right, we today was not a good day, but let's try again tomorrow, right? But you got to be willing to have that accountability there. And if that can't be there, and it's another intimacy plug, by the way, too, right? If mutual accountability is there, that's another intimacy plug, because it's another way you're able to actually really grow close. If intimacy, or if accountability is something you can't do together as a couple, there's always going to be a certain distance. There just is. Because you really can't go there. You just can't go there. All right. Anything else? So think about those three. Think about those three, and really chew on them. Otherwise, it is about quarter after. I'm going to expect to start seeing kids showing up soon. Any other questions? Okay, so next time we're going to maybe do a quick recap like we did, and then get into the actual study questions there for this chapter, okay? So let's close with a short prayer. Lord Jesus, we thank you for another day. We thank you for your commitment to us. It's an unbreakable covenant signed and sealed in your blood. We ask that we would be able to find strength and comfort in that, knowing that you are truly with us. Even to the very end of the age, you will not leave or forsake your people and your church. We also ask that you would help us to build up good, healthy covenant relationships with each other. In friendships and other relationships, yes, but particularly in our marriages. We ask that you would help us to be able to not only love each other well, but also to support one another in those proverbial traditional parts of the vows, in sickness and health, for better and worse, until that day when you welcome us to your side in glory. We ask this as we ask all things in your name. Amen. All right. Again, thank you very much, guys. Good thoughts, and we'll pick up next time.